Imagine waking up tomorrow by breaking news. Siberia has declared independence from Russia. Half the map, home to most of Russia's oil, gas, diamonds, and gold, gone overnight. But could this new Siberian nation even survive its first day? My name is Elvira Bary. I was born in the Soviet Union, and today we are asking one of the most provocative questions. Could Siberia truly survive on its own? Or is the entire idea of Siberian independence doomed from the start? A new state lives or dies on its economy. And on paper, Siberia looks unbeatable. Oceans of oil and gas, mountains of gold, diamonds, coal, and a forest belt big enough to swallow France. Western Siberia alone supplies roughly 70% of Russia's oil and gas. The megafields of Yamal-Nenets and Khanty-Mansi keep the Kremlin on the energy front. Farther east, Yakutia is a treasure chest holding 90% of Russia's diamonds, along with gold and rare minerals. But scratch the surface, and a much harsher picture appears. Agriculture? Virtually non-existent. The problem is not laziness, it's geography and geology. In the north, nutrient-poor soils sit on permafrost, making farming nearly impossible. Where there's no permafrost, there are mountains or dense untamed taiga. Less than 5% of Siberia's land is even suitable for crops, clinging to the southern fringe. Logistics create another choke point. The mighty Ob, Yenisei, and Lena rivers could have been natural superhighways, but they flow north into the Arctic, a dead end for shipping. Vladivostok, the only deep water port, sits thousands of miles from major resource hubs, turning every shipment into a logistical nightmare that leaves just 4 survivors. Government jobs, local services, defense plants, and resource extraction done by fly-in, fly-out crews. Oil workers fly in for 30-day shifts, then charter back west. The profits flow to Moscow-based corporations controlled by Putin's oligarchs. Taxes fill the federal budget. Tourism holds real potential. Siberia is a treasure trove of natural wonders, a dream for anyone drawn to wild northern beauty. Towering Altai mountains wrapped in mist, endless taiga forests where you can wander for days. Lake Baikal, so deep and clear, it feels like you are staring into the Earth's soul. The northern lights shimmering over frozen Yakutia. Volcanoes, geysers, and steaming hot springs in Kamchatka that feel overworldly. For those crave raw wilderness, Siberia offers a kind of wild majesty you won't find anywhere else. But roads, hotels, and basic services still lag decades behind. After 2022, when European borders slammed shut for Russians, interest in Baikal and other wonders surged, yet the much-hyped tourism boom never came, even with federal funding and Putin's personal backing. A joke explains it perfectly. An American asks a Siberian, "Is it true you have bears walking down the roads?" The Siberian answers, "Not true. We don't have any roads." For most Russians, Siberia remains just as remote and unreachable as it is for foreigners. Traveling from Moscow to Vladivostok by train takes nearly 7 days. Flying is faster, but barely affordable. A one-way ticket from my hometown, Nizhny Novgorod, to Irkutsk near Baikal costs almost half the average monthly salary. And you'll still spend 8 hours in the air. It's no surprise that Russian Tsars and later the Communists sent their enemies to Siberia. The climate alone was punishment. Endless forests and merciless winters made escape nearly impossible. The only way out was by railroad, and the guards always knew where to watch for fugitives. But even if you slipped past the guards, the taiga had one more deadly obstacle: hunger. Gruesome stories from Stalin's era tell how escape groups would often invite a large, well-fed man to join them. You can probably guess why. Now you know. I hope this little detail won't haunt your dreams tonight. There are some pockets of milder, monsoon-influenced climate in the Far East, but most of Siberia suffers brutally harsh winters. Local party trick: fling a mug of boiling water into the air. It vapor freezes into a cloud of snow before it even hits the ground. YouTube calls it a Siberian firework. Locals call it a 5-minute science show. As one local joke goes, Siberia has two major holidays: New Year and summer, and both are over in a flash. Summer is short, barely mid-July to mid-August, but when it comes, it hits hard. Temperatures soar and every living creature scrambles to feed while it lasts, including huge mosquitoes. The whole region turns into a giant powder keg. Dried peat bogs and pine forests waiting for a lightning strike or one careless oil rig cigarette to set it ablaze. With no roads and no firefighters for hundreds of miles, a single spark becomes a roaring wall of flame. Thick smoke can smother entire cities so dense you can't even see the traffic lights. Like something out of Silent Hill. Roughly 65% of Siberia sits on permafrost. Buildings must rest on deep pylons, tripling construction costs. Each summer, when the surface thaws, those concrete stilts begin to wander. In Norilsk, dozens of apartment blocks lean so badly, locals call them drunken towers. Climate change hits Siberia especially hard. The region warms by about 2 degrees Celsius every 50 years, far faster than the global average. Fewer deadly frosts might sound like good news, but thawing permafrost sinks buildings, twists pipelines, and shreds roads. On the upper side, it coughs up Ice Age souvenirs. Baby mammoth Luba, perfectly preserved after 42,000 years. Or cave lion cubs Boris and Sparta, with fur and whiskers intact. Mammoth tusk hunters still roam the tundra, gambling on the next frozen jackpot. Siberia's biggest challenge is population. Most indigenous nations were wiped out or absorbed. Before Russians arrived, this land belonged to dozens of indigenous groups: Khanty, Nenets, Evenks, Chukchi, and many more. What drew Moscow east was simple: expanding its fur tax base. Vast hunting grounds meant sable pelts and other furs. Every European king wore ermine mantles, symbols of wealth, purity, and absolute power. But where did all those ermines come from? The answer is always Siberia. For centuries, trappers scoured its snowy forests, hunting thousands of sable, ermine, and fox to feed Europe's appetite for luxury furs. In the Russian Empire, fur was also as valuable as gold. The iconic Boyar hat, huge and cylindrical, was made from the throats of martens and sables. That's why in Russian it's called Горлатая шапка, literally throat hat. The wealthy also wore belly fur coats, made from the softest fur of the animal's underside. Winter coats were sewn fur side in for warmth. Only the collar faced outward. The outer layer was covered with fabric. So the Siberian taiga brought furs, the furs brought money, the money built armies and palaces. Colonization here looked much like the American West. Where cowboys raised Fort Laramie, Russians built wooden stockades called ostrogs. Tobolsk, Yeniseisk, Yakutsk. A few cannons, matchlock muskets, and a treaty signed in a language few locals understood, and the land changed hands. Then came smallpox, flu, and trade alcohol. Entire clans vanished within a season. Nomadic reindeer herders were saddled with fur debts. Mrs. Sable Quota, lose your pasture. Almost a carbon copy of Hudson's Bay Company playbook in the 18th century Canada. Over 3 centuries, many nations shrank, some hovered near extinction. Their languages now sit on UNESCO's endangered list. Oddly, Russians often knew more about America's indigenous peoples than those in Siberia. In the US, books and countless westerns romanticized Native American tribes. In Russia, there were only a few attempts to depict Siberia's native peoples, usually as a comical stereotypes. That's how during Soviet times hundreds of jokes emerged about the Chukchi, the simple-minded reindeer herder turned national punchline. Russians pushed east in the 17th century. First came Cossacks and garrison troops, sent to guard the frontiers and control native tribes. Then came convicts, political and criminal, followed by adventurers, merchants, and gold seekers chasing quick riches. In the 19th century, after serfdom was abolished, the state relocated masses of peasants. Waves of families poured into Siberia, lured by promises of free land, only to discover much of it barely produced anything. The Soviets added millions more. In the 1930s and 40s, prisoners filled labor camps across the taiga. Later, entire youth brigades arrived to build mega projects like the Baikal-Amur main line. Roughly 500,000 young Soviets laid that track to the future, and many never left. Yet Siberia remains almost empty. About 30 million people across a space the size of Canada. Fewer than 3 people per square kilometer, compared to 60 in central Russia. Birth rates hover around 1.4 children per woman. Alcoholism and drug abuse outpace national averages. In 2016, Moscow launched the Far Eastern Hectare program, offering a free hectare, about 2.5 acres, to anyone willing to move east, build a home, and farm the land. On paper, it sounded like a frontier fairy tale. In reality, no roads, no power, no running water, just endless bogs. Unsurprisingly, a few people signed up, and most eventually drifted back west. The grand repopulation quietly sank into the muskeg. A major slice of eastern Siberia landed on Russia's map at China's expense. When Russian detachments first crossed the Urals in the 17th century, much of what is now southeastern Russia was considered Chinese territory. A series of brutal conflicts followed, as Russians and Chinese fought to tax the indigenous tribes. Why didn't the indigenous tribes create their own state and control the fur trade? Because there simply weren't enough of them. They lacked the farming base to support armies or sustain markets. They needed an outside power to organize trade and offer protection. In Siberia, there were only 2 choices: Russia or China. The Treaty of Nerchinsk, signed in 1689, drew the first official border between the 2 empires. It held for nearly 150 years, until China's power collapsed. The 19th century exposed deep cracks. The Opium Wars, Taiping Rebellion, and devastating famines tore the Qing Empire apart. St. Petersburg seized its chance. In 1858, Governor-General Nikolai Muravyev-Amursky sailed gunboats up the Amur River and forced a local Qing official to sign the Treaty of Aigun, surrendering vast Chinese territories to Russia. 2 years later, while China was distracted by an Anglo-French invasion, Moscow sealed the Peking Convention of 1860, claiming Primorye, the site of Vladivostok and Russia's only warm water Pacific port. Today, many Russians view Siberia as a national treasure. For centuries, it filled state coffers. Yet a lingering fear persists that someone secretly dreams of seizing Siberia's riches. I remember a joke from the Iraq War era that captures that paranoia. Two American soldiers pray before the invasion. One says, "Dear Lord, help me survive, or at least let me die a hero." The other adds, "Dear Lord, please make the oil disappear from Siberia." The first soldier looks confused. "What are you talking about?" The second replies, "Do you really want to go protect democracy in Siberia?" I never fully understand this fear. As if Siberia's wealth belongs to ordinary people, when in fact, it's controlled by Russian oligarchs. But apparently, as long as the oppressor carries the right passport, people feel safer. Chinese historians group all these concessions, Hong Kong, Primorye, and others, under one label, the Century of Humiliation. From the 1839 Opium War to the founding of the PRC in 1949, China lost land, sovereignty, and dignity. Reclaiming great power status is more than policy. It's psychological revenge. Officially, Beijing accepts today's borders, but Chinese textbooks still refer to the Amur's left bank as lost homeland. Memory powers long games. Today, Siberia feels creeping cynicization. No thanks, just steady gravity pulling it into Beijing's orbit. Tens of thousands of Chinese workers arrive yearly to log forests, pour concrete, or farm soy in Russia. Many stay, marry locals, and open noodle shops in villages that once had one dusty Produkty store. Chinese agribusiness leases hundreds of thousands of acres in Amur Oblast and the Jewish Autonomous Region. On paper, they are joint ventures. In practice, it's Chinese capital under Russian paperwork. Night after night, flatbeds loaded with raw timber roll across the border. Locals complain, "China's stripping our taiga." Yet the chainsaws often belong to Russian firms, registered under cousins in Harbin. The new Blagoveshchensk bridge and the power of Siberia pipeline pump more than cargo. They pump dependence. Yuan replaces rubles. Alipay QR codes outnumber Sberbank terminals in border towns. Chinese elementary schools open in Chitai and Irkutsk. Demand for Mandarin classes surges. Flea markets give way to Taobao shuttles. Any hamlet can order a tractor direct from Manchuria. All of this is legal, just business. But the result is a steady pivot from Moscow toward Beijing. Money flows east, trade routes shift east, even taste buds migrate from black tea with condensed milk to puer. The Kremlin speaks of a no-limit strategic partnership, but for many Siberians, that already means bread, lumber, and even mobile data arriving with a Mandarin accent. While Moscow watches Ukraine, China secures the Amur. No thanks, just investments. True, Beijing carries its own burdens, slowing growth, heavy debt, and looming demographics. Open annexation is unlikely, even in a Russian breakup. Siberia's future depends on whether Moscow can offer alternatives. Rail to the west, markets in India, or advanced processing at home. Without that, cynicization may become the quietest and most effective revenge for the century of humiliation. Meanwhile, Japan still eyes southern Sakhalin. Once its Karafuto prefecture. Under the 1875 St. Petersburg Treaty, Russia took full control of Sakhalin in exchange for ceding the Kurils. After the Russo-Japanese War, the 1905 Portsmouth Treaty handed South Sakhalin to Tokyo. In 1918, exploiting Russia's civil war, Japanese troops landed in Vladivostok, ostensibly to protect residents of Japanese heritage, but in reality to seize oil and create a puppet state. Brutal winters, partisans, hunger, and roadless swamps turned it into a nightmare. Under US and British pressure, Tokyo pulled out, signing a face-saving agreement with Moscow. August 1945 redrew the map again. Soviet forces seized Karafuto in 8 days, then swept down the Kuril chain. Japan's surrender cost it both South Sakhalin and every island in the arc. Today, Tokyo seeks only 4 southern Kuril islets. But with Russia and nuclear power, the fight stays diplomatic. So, could Siberia break away from Russia? In theory, yes. In practice, sustaining itself is a far tougher story. Running a country of this size requires bureaucrats, an army, infrastructure, and open markets. And in Siberia, each of those is a major weak spot. The pipelines point west into Russia and south into China. If Moscow shuts the valves or Beijing slashes its purchases, exports collapse overnight. With so few people, there's no real domestic market and no solid tax base to fund even basic services like schools, hospitals, or roads. Then comes the boom and bust cycle. Oil, gas, and nickel keep the lights on as long as global prices stay high. But keeping fields productive or developing new ones demands Western technology and long-term investments that a fragile newborn republic simply wouldn't have. If prices fall or if field dries up, Siberia turns into a clearance sale, most likely to China. And finally, geopolitics. Caught between Beijing, Moscow, and just offshore Tokyo, Siberia would sit inside a power vacuum that nature does not tolerate. Without a navy or strong alliances, an independent Siberia quickly faces a stark choice: become someone's raw material province or find a bigger pattern to lean on. But who? China offers a vast market and deep pockets, but risks full absorption into Beijing's orbit. Japan might bring technology and investment, but its support would be fragile, limited by its shrinking population and modest military reach. Central Russia might break apart too, forming a new federation with Siberia built on shared infrastructure and history. But even then, the old problem returns: centralized power and limited real independence. So, could Siberia really survive without Russia? My forecast: even if secession happens, it won't last. Siberia simply lacks the foundations for a stable, self-sufficient state. Sooner or later, it would fold back into a larger structure, just to keep basic services running and maintain security. Understanding these realities isn't just interesting. It matters deeply for global politics and economics. If this exploration opened your eyes or challenged how you see Siberia's future, please share this video so others can learn too. Don't forget to subscribe and hit like if you appreciate content that digs beneath the surface. And if you'd like to support even deeper investigations into Russia's complexities, consider joining my think tank or simply buying me a coffee. Every contribution helps keep this work going. Thanks for watching. And most of all, thank you for your caring enough to understand the world a little better.